very privileged to have on the phone from Bath, Midge Ure, OBE. Sir, how are you today?
I'm incredibly well. I'm not a sir yet.
Oh, no, it's Bob, isn't it? Bob Geldof. He's the sir.
That's the other one, yeah, the tall one.
Now, I know we're going to talk about your new album, which is orchestrated and is quite brilliant. But just before that, I just want to take you back a little bit and talk about some of the other bands or some of the bands that you've been in. I mean, through the 70s and 80s, there was Slick, Thin Lizzy, The Rich Kids, Visage, and of course, Ultravox. Do you feel that those bands have contributed to the person you are now musically?
Oh, absolutely, no doubt. Music's a funny thing, you know. You don't, like anything in life, you know, you don't go into your first job and then stay with it for the next 50 years. You develop, you grow, you change, your opinions change, your ideas change, you hopefully get better at what you do. And all of those bands all led me onto each other. It looks like I'm a dreadful musical tart if you look at my background on a piece of paper. But in reality, you know, Slick was an oddity. But I was given the opportunity of moving from Glasgow to London to join the Rich Kids, the whole kind of new wave thing. During the Rich Kids, I bought a synthesizer in 1978 when nobody else wanted to use synthesizers. Through that, I developed the idea of Visage. I just joined Ultravox when I got the phone call from Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy saying, Gary Moore's out the band, we're in America doing this massive tour, can you come out and finish the tour? So I never actually joined Thin Lizzy, but I did tour with them quite a few times. So there's a linear path all the way through it, and each step that you take through life, you learn from your mistakes, you learn from the good stuff, you learn from your peers, and it was a massive apprenticeship for me.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned there the synth pop new wave stuff, and that was really the 80s, where one of my all-time favourite tunes, which is Fade to Grey by Visage, you wrote that, produced it. What was Visage like? Because, I mean, you had Steve Strange in there.
Well, Visage was a project that the drummer, my old friend Rusty Egan, and we kind of put this idea together. We wanted to do something where we could make music to play in the clubs that Rusty and his friend Steve were running in London at the time. This is pre-Blitz. This is a small club in London where kids wanted to come along and listen to David Bowie and Roxy Music and a lot of the music, the electronic stuff coming out of Europe at the time. So we just wanted to make some music, and Steve wanted to be a singer, and we wanted to work with all our favourite musicians, one of whom was the keyboard player Billy Curry from Ultravox, some of the guys from the band Magazine. So for us it was a studio project and nothing more than that. It was a way of creating what we hoped was interesting music just to play in that club. So when Fade to Grey became the huge success that it did, you know, all around the world, it was a bit of a surprise to us, to say the least.
Yeah, but what an amazing track. I love that track. Even now, it still sounds really strong. After Visage, Ultravox, and of course, the iconic Vienna, which I've got to say, I know I said we'd talk about the album in a moment, but on Orchestrated, it sounds as though that's the way it should have been. Did you have that sort of thing in mind when you wrote and prepared that song? No, not at all. We were trying to create something that was an interesting piece of music. Everyone thinks of Vienna as this huge kind of bombastic OTT production, but when you actually listen to it, there is very little. It's incredibly sparse. There is very little on that track. It's a drum machine, a synthesized bass, a piano, a synthesizer, and a violin. That's kind of it. So it was the atmosphere that we created with that piece of music that made it feel it was this massive cinematic thing. And of course, the video that we created to go with the track, people remember that, and that kind of that enhances that whole cinematic, atmospheric element. But the song itself was absolutely right at the time. It was
it went against everything that radio stood for at the time. It was more than 3 minutes long. It didn't really have a structure that people would understand. It speeds up, it slows down, it's got a violin solo, all of the things that you could put together and think, if I wanted to make a record that would never get played on the radio, this would be it. These are the elements you'd use. So at the time, it was absolutely right that it sounded like that, because it still sounds fresh today. When you hear that record on the radio just popping up randomly, it still sounds incredibly fresh. It's not dated, and that's a quality that all musicians try and strive for.
I remember seeing Ultravox actually on stage and watching the performance of that track, and the atmosphere within the auditorium where we were was just sort of wow. It really, and it still does that to me anyway. It's amazing.
It's one of those oddities that it seemed to appeal to all age groups. It wasn't just I suppose back then it would be the new wave or new romantic, fans that liked it. It did this massive crossover thing, which is odd when you think of what the song actually is. It's not an overtly commercial song. As I said, it was a piece of music that just happened to touch people's hearts, and that's amazing. So you do get that reaction still today.
Yeah. Another track which I love as well that came out of Ultravox is "Dancing with Tears in My Eyes," which once again is one of those pieces of music which really gets you, but totally different to Vienna. Were you sort of conscious of the fact that your writing and the music produced by Ultravox was so different?
We were very aware of the pressures put upon us. Just after Vienna was the huge commercial success it was, every territory that we would tour in or go and do televisions or promotion or whatever, every record company, every record executive would take us out to dinner and say, you know what, Paris is it's an interesting place. Or have you ever thought in writing a song about Sydney? And you think, oh, please, you cannot do it. So we were incredibly aware that we didn't want to step over the same old ground. That for us, it was the interesting process was new. It was exciting. It was walking away from what you'd done already. In fact, the album we did directly after the Vienna album, which is the first album I did with Ultravox, we went to the studio in the middle of the German countryside with not one song, with not one idea. We walked into the studio and we created the entire album in the studio over a 3-month period. Now that is as far removed from Vienna as you could possibly get, where we had written the songs, we had toured them, then went into the studio and recorded them. So that was an interesting process for us. Was the challenge of coming up with something new and equally interesting, maybe not as commercially successful, because that comes from a different world. Something decides that that's going to be successful, but that doesn't mean that what you write around that isn't equally good.
Yeah. Now after that, I've got a couple of things which I've got to ask you. Is this true? Number one, is it true that you were rehearsing with Ultravox for an episode of Channel 4's The Tube when Paulie Yates handed you the phone and said, "It's me husband, it's Geldof," and he convinced you to go and do Band-Aid with him?
Yes, that's true. Yes, I was on the music program, The Tube. I can't remember whether it was Ultravox or solo. And I was chatting to Paula, who was hugely pregnant, and Bob called her. And I'd known Bob and Paula for years. So she said he wants to speak to you, and handed me the phone. And he told me about the footage you had just seen on television, the Michael Burke news footage on the BBC about the famine in Ethiopia. And he launched into his tirade, and we decided we'd meet up a couple of days later, and that was it. The Band-Aid's concept was born.
And the other thing I want to know, if it's true, that Bob Geldof provided the initial lyrics, you were working on the musical theme in your kitchen, and the second half was put together by you, but there was no sort of chorus or anything like that. And that wasn't...
Well, there is no chorus. It's
no, there
absolutely
isn't,
true.
No, there isn't.
No, The sing-along bit comes at the very end of the song. So, most people these days start their songs with the chorus because they want to capture an audience straight away. They want to grab your attention straight away. And of course, we'd written this thing that was unlike anything else we'd written before, it's structurally. And the two of us stood there in my studio. I played all the instruments on the record, so I was sitting there listening to this thing almost complete before we'd put all the artist vocals on and Phil Collins drums. And we're standing there looking at each other going, there's nothing to sing along with. It's the weirdest structure. There's no verse and chorus. It's just this thing that just starts and then gets bigger and then nothing. So we came up with this. Bob said it needs something like John and Yoko's Happy Christmas, War is Over. Something you can sing along. War is over, did you want? So we came up between the two of us. We came up with the whole Feed the World thing.
It is brilliant, but it's like you said with Vienna. It's another one of those songs where, when you analyse it, there isn't really a lot of structure to the song, but it's brilliant for that.
Well, the structure's there, but it's just odd.
Yes.
It's just bizarre. It's like taking the if there was a rule to songwriting book, it's like taking that book and throwing it away, and just doing what you think might be interesting, as opposed to copying what you've heard all your life.
And yet you're still involved because, as far as I know, I don't know whether this is still true, that I know you did Band Aid, you did Live Aid, and you did Live 8 with Sir Bob, but then you're, I don't know, are you still an ambassador for Save the Children?
I'm still an ambassador for Save the Children when they require me, absolutely, and I'm still a Band Aid trustee. It's now gone 32 years since we did the Band Aid project. So all the trustees who were there in the first place, the ones that are still alive, that is, are still there because it's our responsibility. That record generates large amounts of money every year. And that money has to be, overseen, and the projects have to be funded. It's an ongoing thing, so it's not the sort of thing you can just walk away from.
No. It's and it is an important thing because, as you say, that still raises money every single year, and it's incredible. It was in the charts 2017, for goodness sake.
Oh, was it? There you go. See, you know more than I do.
Yeah, at one point, all the entire sort of Christmas chart of 2017 were all sort of old tunes, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. But moving on from that, 1985, The Gift, number 2 in the UK charts, and the number 1 single, If I Was, which was a solo project. Brilliant track. Where did the inspiration for that come from?
Well, I was working with a songwriter friend of mine. I went through a process of it's wonderful having Ultravox, and it was great doing it, and I absolutely loved being in the band. But Ultravox got quite complex musically, and we decided that during a bit of a musical break, we'd all go off and do other things. So some of them went off and lay on beaches and cut hedges and cut the grass and did whatever. I went into the studio and started working on some simplified music ideas, and I was co-writing with a friend of mine, Danny Mitchell, and this is a song that Danny kind of had in a very rough form, and we worked on it together, and we decided that whatever we would work on, a bit Lennon McCartney, whoever would work on whichever song, that's it, we would put it down as the two of us. So we worked on a handful of tunes for this very simplistic album, The Gift. And again, it was one of those things that you put it out there not knowing whether anyone's going to like it or not, and it was a huge success.
Now, the other thing that I was fascinated by, although I did know it previously, is that you and Phil Lynott wrote Yellow Pearl, which was the theme of Top of the Pops for much of the 80s. That, once again,
we did, yeah.
Huge anthemic piece of music.
Well, again, it was one of those things when I went out, as we talked about earlier, when I went out to help Thin Lizzy when I just joined Ultravox, I was just putting the finishing touches to the production of the first Visage album, and I went off to America for the first time to join up with Thin Lizzy and finish their tour for them, always with the intention of going straight back to Ultravox and completing, the work we were working on then. When Thin Lizzy kept me on board until they found a proper replacement guitarist, because I was there as a hired gun in a way. When they were trying out all the guitar players, they asked me to do a bit of keyboards at the back of the stage. So I jumped over onto synthesizers and whatever. And during sound checks, we used to jam this little da-da-da-da-da, which Philip loved. So when Philip came to do his solo album, he said, let's go and record that thing. So I brought in Billy Currie and I brought in Rusty Egan, and lo and behold, Yellow Pearl came out, and it became the Top of the Pops soundtrack, theme tune for about 3-4 years through the 80s, yeah.
It's an amazing piece of music. I want to take you to Breathe, the album Breathe, 1996. It was recorded mostly in Los Angeles, although it's got a very Celtic feel. But the single Breathe became a huge hit in, let's think, what were the countries? Italy, Austria, Spain, Germany, because it was used in a Swatch TV ad. Is that right? It
was. And I'll be forever grateful for that as well, because you've got to think that, during the 90s, when everybody and his brother involved in the music industry was kind of letting DJs get their hands on the music and let them do remixes where you get these clashing notes and atonal, nonsense mixes, because that was what the current fad was. So during the 90s, when I refused point blank to do any of that, you make a piece of music, you don't let someone come in and mess it all up and turn it inside out and turn it into something that you don't like. So I refused to do that stuff. So my record label had no idea what to do with me. I was a bit of a liability for them. So they suggested that I don't produce my own music, that I maybe do some co-writing, that I maybe don't use the same musicians I would normally use, don't record it in my own studio, So they signed me and then wanted me to completely change. So I ended up with finding a producer that I liked in Los Angeles, and we made this album, which I was very proud of. I gave it to the record company because the record company didn't have key people in positions around the world in their side of the business and the label side of the things. It sat on a shelf for a year, which is hideously frustrating. And then when it did come out, it became the worst-selling record that I was ever associated with, ever, and remained that way for 2 years until a fan in Italy who bought the album the day it came out took it to Swatch and played them the song. His job was to put contemporary music together with TV commercials, and they fell in love with it and used it for a TV campaign. And when people heard this, the most amazing thing happened. Radio stations were being inundated by people calling up saying, "What is this piece of music?" And the radio stations were saying, "Well, we've got no idea." But they already had my album in the library, and they had it for 2 years, but never played it. So this thing that I'd done became immensely successful. Throughout Europe, as you say, it was number one in the European charts for months and months and months.
Yeah.
But I didn't change anything. It's the same piece of music, just people saw it in a different light.
And now it's set to become a hit all over again as the lead track from the album Orchestrated.
How ironic is that? It's very bizarre, Well, Orchestrated, for anyone who doesn't know it, it's a body of work. It's an album that I've done exactly what it says on the tin. It's an orchestrated album, and I chose songs, not just the commercial successes, but I chose pieces of music through the years with Ultravox and through the solo years that I thought would really lend themselves to cinematic orchestrations. And of course,
Breathe is one of those songs. And when I played the album to the current label here in the UK, they thought Breathe was a new song. They had never heard it, because although the original version was huge throughout Europe, it never did anything at all here in the UK. So yes, that's the current single from the orchestrated album, and it's been played to death, which is just incredible.
Well, we're playing it here because basically I love it. I think it's one of those tunes which, when you listen to it, you think it should have been this way. But then again, it had a life before that, but now it just fits perfectly, doesn't it?
Well, I think the key to doing something like orchestrated is not to just do that quick fix, which we see on television, TV advertised albums all the time, of someone doing all the re-recording all their old hits and just throwing some strings on it and saying, here we go, here's a new version of it. We've taken some of these songs. I mean, you mentioned Dancing with Tears in My Eyes earlier. If you listen to the version of Dancing with Tears in My Eyes we have in orchestrated, it's a very, very, very different song.
Yes.
It's slow, it's dramatic, it's incredibly poignant, and you can hear what the song was actually written about. So taking those songs, I mean, we spent 18 months doing these orchestrations, so it wasn't a quick fix, it wasn't just a quick turnover. This was a piece of music. We wanted to look at these pieces of music that I've done over the years and see what we could do with them to make them better or more interesting or different or enhance them or whatever. So I'm immensely proud of what we've done on this album.
The one thing I must tell you is that when I sit there and I close my eyes and I've listened to most of the tracks on the album, not all of them, I will be honest, but you get to see visions in your mind. It paints pictures. The music actually paints pictures, which to me is fantastic. I mean, I don't know if anybody else feels the same way about it, but that's what it does for me.
Well, that's what music did for all of us. Pre the music video, pre-MTV, pre all of these things. I'm partly responsible for it because I helped create the monster. Prior to pop videos, music did that. When I used to play, when I was a kid, driving back in my transit van from Inverness at 3 o'clock in the morning after doing a gig, and it's snowing, I used to put on, Ziggy Stardust on the 8-track player, and everyone else would be asleep in the van, and I'd be driving, and I'd be listening to Moon Age Daydream, and I had images going on in my head. I had my own personal videos running in my head,
exactly.
And that's what music should do. And we kind of killed that by making the video, because once you saw a video that went hand in hand with a particular song, that was the image we all had, whereas we all had different images. So I'm glad to hear that you're getting that. You're getting that kind of feeling that your own personal, images running around your head.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. There is one question I'm going to ask you, a bit of a nasty one, but how's the cooking going?
Cooking, I did the MasterChef thing here in the UK, and it was funny how it happened, because as a musician, and don't ask me why, as a musician, you're constantly asked if you want to go ballroom dancing, or you want to go in the jungle, or do you want to do whatever, house swap, or wife swap, anything, all of these programs. And I just kept saying no, 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 no. And my agent said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, the only thing I'm interested in is something that they might teach me something, I might learn something, or cooking, because I've watched MasterChef since it was a Sunday afternoon program with Lloyd Grossman, and I love the program. So within 20 minutes, he called back and said, right, you're on, put your money where your mouth is. So I did the program, but anything that you love doing, when it turns into a competition, you cease to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the program, I was thinking, oh God, why am I cooking, trying to make a 3-course meal in 20 minutes? Why am I in the middle of a field with a Primus stove trying to make food for 200 squaddies? It doesn't make any sense. This is what cooking's all about. So I after the program, I still do it and I still enjoy it, but I don't do it nearly as much as I used to.
But you did make the final, which is the most important part.
I did make the final. Yes, I did. Yeah.
Midge Ure, thank you so much for talking to me. The album is fantastic. We will continue to play it. And I shall continue to sort of lie back in the sunshine and listen to those tracks and paint pictures in my mind.
Oh, stop it. It's much, much better if you're in the rain like I am.
So thank you very much for talking with me.
It's a pleasure.
I wish you all the best with the album. And if you ever get to tour it, don't forget Spain.
Oh, listen, please. I know we seem to have missed Spain out for quite a long time. Although I got back again last year. I managed to do Barcelona and Madrid. So we've got a foot back in the door. You have to be asked. You have to be invited. So I'm waiting for the invites.
Right. Okay. Midge Ure, once again, thank you so much for talking with me. And take care. We'll see you soon, hopefully.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye now.